So in this video, I would like to talk about a book that I've read quite a few times that I consider to be probably one of the most underrated books on strategy um, in modern times, basically. It's the Book of Five Rings, written by Miyamoto Musashi. He was a samurai, and he is known amongst those that study medieval Japanese history as the most famous, most successful swordsman of his time. And this is a book that he wrote about like 500 years ago or so, and it's not recognized as like a book on military strategy because most of it, well, not actually most of it, but I'd say about a good third of the book is on technical details regarding swordsmanship. But there are throughout the five chapters or so, there are excerpts that relate almost purely to strategy. The other parts of it is philosophy, basically. And to like the modern Westerner, um, they people in the West, they like to just focus a lot these days on like technical analysis and critical analysis and just dissecting things. That's the way that modern academia is focused on. And books like this are always underrated. In fact, hang on. This other book that everybody probably knows about. This is never really taken seriously in the West. The university that I went to, where I studied international politics, the degree I studied was international politics and military history. So the military history part, there were courses that was formally taught. Yeah, these books are never taken seriously, and the reason why is because they will never admit it, but people in the West are biased, especially the academics. And it is funny, because in the West, everyone always, well, in the university that I went to in Wales, everyone tries to, everyone buys into the idea, which is inclusive, diversity and inclusivity. The way they portray it is that they are all encompassing of like different people, different cultures, different races, this, that, and the other. That they go through the motions of these things. I never once found it that they were actually genuinely accommodating. Because, for example, I've mentioned in a previous video before, I never fit in, and one of the reasons why is that I never saw eye to eye on anybody on like basically anything. Okay, maybe it's a little bit exaggerating. There were a bunch of other people that did, but on the course at least, right? I never saw eye to eye with almost everybody. There was a couple of guys here and there, but they were not part of my class. They were seniors to me. Um, yeah, they go through the motions of saying that yes, we are all encompassing and that we accept and recognize all the different viewpoints or different type of people that think differently, all this and that. Nah, it's all nonsense, man. Especially in international relations, you have to willingly forego not only Western history prior to the Treaty of Westphalia, you have to ignore everything that happened outside of the West in like all of history if you want to buy into international relations theory. And yeah, that is very, very apparent, at least for me, because like I said, I was uh, I was like one of the handful of foreigners. I'm pretty sure outside of like mainland Chinese. Now the thing about the other East Asians that were there was a lot of Chinese from the mainland, but they never talked to anybody. It was very weird. It's like they never interacted with anybody else that was there. They always kept to themselves. They would talk amongst themselves. Some of them could barely speak English. I'm not entirely sure how they got there. It's a mystery to me. And everyone does recognize that there were a decent amount of Chinese students there, and a few of them were on the course as well. But like we'd never see them, and most of the time they would never actually show up to class either. So I don't know what was going on there. But from my experience from going to the seminars and the lectures, I was basically the only Far East Asian dude there. There were a couple of dudes from the Middle East, Pakistan, and some of the Arab countries. Can't quite recall exactly where. I think there was a couple of dudes from like Dubai, the UAE. I never quite talked to them. But yeah, going back to where I was, I've gone off tangent here. Western universities, they don't take Oriental philosophy and history seriously at all. So yeah, back to the Book of Five Rings. This is, as far as I'm concerned, a book on military strategy, military philosophy. About a third of the book is on technical details of swordsmanship, but it is, in my opinion, a very important book on strategy that should be recognized for its merits on that. So I'm just going to go through very quickly some of the major points that I found in the book, because I think I first read it almost 10 years ago in like 2015, 2016. That was when I got this copy of the book. One thing you have to be careful about books like these is that there are different translations. So I've already gotten a couple of other translations of this book, but I haven't read those yet. So one of these days, I'm gonna go read through all of them, and then I'd also need to try and study translating books into other languages, especially on this specific topic of history. Whether or not there's certain things that you or I, as the reader, should know about as we read these things. But for this video, I'm just gonna give my raw thoughts of the things that I've learned from this book that I'd like to share over the past 10 years or so. Over the past 10 years that I've read and come back and read it again, reread it. So for this translation version here, let me just double check which translation by William Scott Wilson. So the preface they give is background of Miyamoto, who he was. They give the historical context of the time of which he lived and then when he wrote the book. And at the beginning here, there is the way of walking alone. It's just a distilled down bullet point version of Musashi's core philosophy. Translation, the way of self-reliance. And it is quite interesting because it's got certain similarities with certain Western philosophies. To me, there were quite a lot of similarities with Stoicism, which is one of the Western philosophies that I actually take quite some time studying. I'm not too familiar with general philosophy. I'm not a philosopher or someone who studies philosophy. There's a bunch of other people, especially on YouTube. I can't remember what their names are. I think there's Jared Henderson and Joe somebody. Unsolicited Advice, I think that's what his YouTube channel's name. Now those guys, they know a thing or two about philosophy because they actually read the whole thing and then they analyze and do all this and that. I've never properly studied philosophy like that. For me, it's a matter of practical usefulness. I'm probably not using the right words here, but for me, when I study philosophy, I'm looking for something that helps me out, basically. So Stoicism, I know some things there, and I know generally kind of the story behind the development of Western philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, those things. But I'm not gonna talk too much because, as I just said, not quite qualified to talk about comparing different schools of philosophy, especially in comparison between Western and Eastern. But you have some similarities, and of course, you can find that there's a lot of Eastern Oriental philosophy that is quite unique to that specific culture. So that's there in the beginning of the book. Then you get to different chapters. So there are 5 chapters. There's Earth, Fire, Water, Air, and Void, I believe. Let me just double check. Yep, Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, and Emptiness. I think in one of the other translations it's Void. Could be wrong about that. been some time since I've actually read the book. But yeah, each of the different chapters deals with different aspects of martial arts, or I guess you could say warfare, kind of. Um, as I said at the beginning, about a third of the book is focused on the technical aspects of swordsmanship. So you have like parts here, understanding the value of armor. He just gives um, yeah, technical details regarding the use of weapons during his time. Swords, spears, he has actually a chapter, well, part of a chapter, a whole chunk of it is dedicated to the comparison of the different weapons of his time. So like, how would you fight somebody with a spear, if you're using a sword, or how you use two swords, or, this, that, and the other. There is a decent amount of that, but there is also a decent amount of philosophy and strategy. So every now and then you'd get into excerpts like this: frame of mind. Just now there was something regarding the words themselves. What does it mean? Martial arts. Of course, remember these are translations, so you're gonna have to try reading between the lines here and there. You do need to know just a little bit about Eastern philosophy and Oriental society, just a little bit. So most of the core Eastern philosophies, or should I say, most of the ways of thinking during Japan at this point in time, heavily influence Buddhism, Confucianism. I'm pretty sure Taoism is somewhere in there as well. Yeah, you don't really need to know that in depth, but you need to know some of the aspects. And it's important to bring this up because if going back to my experience with studying in the West, every now and then you try to talk to somebody about things like these, and they just wouldn't quite get it or understand. I think I mentioned before regarding Soviet combat tactics in the lecture. That specific seminar that I was in, it was like almost 80% women, and they were all white women from Western European countries. And they spent like half an hour trying to wrap their heads around, like, why would the Soviets, send infantry in front of the tanks to clear the minefield by just stepping on them? It's like they couldn't quite wrap their heads around that. And this was before the war in Ukraine. So yeah, you have to understand, if you're a Westerner, that there are different people out there who think completely differently because of the way that their culture evolved and the way that the traditions that they have, they are completely separately developed from the Western tradition. There are societies like that that do still exist, funnily enough. It's crazy, I know. So as the philosophical parts there, I'm not going to talk too much about it because, as I said, I haven't fully studied into philosophy that much formally. But as for the military strategy stuff, what you find here is I think one of the oldest recorded, let's see. What you find here is one of the oldest written down records of situational awareness and the importance of situational awareness and the importance of experience. A lot of times, the final sentences in most of Musashi's descriptions and explanations here is that you need to go try this out for yourself. And that's basically the polite way of saying that experience outranks everything. You got to get experience in these things, especially if you're a swordsman. You can't read about swordsmanship. You have to practice, and then of course you're gonna have to get into combat, get experience that way as well. That's probably the best way to actually learn and test yourself and get something that would be useful in a future engagement of some sort. But there is a lot regarding frame of mind and decision making cycles in this book, and yeah, it's about 25% of the book is just situational awareness and making decisions. And it's the way that it's written that is very unique, that I find very enjoyable to read. Every now and then when I come back to, when I used to read it in the past years, every now and then you'd come back and there would be a certain sentence or two here and there that never quite made sense at the time, but as I've lived and grown over the last 10 years since I was 16 to now where I'm 25, yeah, be certain passages which I completely at 10 years ago never paid any attention to, but now after living a little bit, come back and see, oh well, that is interesting. That is interesting observation there. Um, so yeah, understanding how to recognize the really core technical stuff regarding swordsmanship, and then ignoring those. That's something that I already done because I've read it so many times. But there are other things regarding like initiative is as a part of a chapter here where he talks about initiative, and it's regarding when you're attacking, when the opponent is attacking. That right there is if you read through Western military strategy, there were a lot of similarities in the way that Musashi writes about here and thinks about that. It's almost one-to-one. Like there's quite a few overlaps here, despite the fact that this is a very old book. You find a lot of similarities with On War with Clausewitz, certain passages in there, and other books on military strategy that modern in the West. And as far as I can tell, there was no real cross development between these philosophies and these thinkers of military strategy. They both were developed separately. And in the case here with the Book of Five Rings, you can see that there are differing there are different conclusions that are drawn. Yeah, there are differing conclusions that are drawn and developed that make it very unique. One core important thing that I've learned through reading this book, which is of quite big relevance today regarding confrontations between the United States and China. Orientals do not think of warfare or the use of the military as a distinct and separate form of governance, politics, or life itself. I'm gonna try explain that. In the West, there is, especially in democracies, there has to be concrete definitions and lines of. There has to be in Western democracies, there has to be a distinction between the military and the government. And there has to be clear distinctions over like how the chain of command works and who serves who. And you can see reflections of this in Western military philosophy and strategy, that warfare and the use of the military is thought of as a separate thing from everything else. All right? Orientals do not think like this at all. To the Oriental mind, there is no real distinction between the use of military force and using other forms of coercion or we'll go with coercion. I'm probably not using the right word there because not everything that the Orientals do is going to be aggressive and, in a sense, has the ulterior motive or the ultimate objective of trying to get something, basically. That's not really how it works. But if we're talking in a conflict, in a competitive environment, how about we go with that? In a zone of conflict, Orientals don't distinguish the difference between the use of military force, the use of political force, the use of economics, use of culture, society, this, that, and the other. To them, these are all just different tools that we can use to gain an advantage in some way, shape, or form. And in the West, usually military force is like the last resort for everything. For the Orientals, they too do value life. So it's not always, you hear criticisms and analysis from a lot of Westerners, especially a lot of Western military commanders in their memoirs. They will write like, Orientals don't value life the same way as Westerners. It's not entirely true. We do, like not to die, but there is an element of truth to it in the sense that they don't see the way of committing human resources or lives of men into a conflict the exact same way as Westerners do. You can see this in the way that Orientals wage war, and especially when they have to fight a Western counterpart, clashes of culture and ideologies there. It is true that we can, by we, I mean Oriental and Far Eastern societies, we are willing to accept and suffer losses which in the West would have been like completely unacceptable and are still, completely unacceptable. But that's not because that we don't, it's not that because we're brave or anything, or people in the West, soldiers that fight, they're all brave. It's just the overall arching philosophy of how we live our lives and how we use military force. There is a difference between the two cultures. And you can find a lot of that here in the way that Musashi talks about how you should think about conducting yourself in combat. And he has several passages in the book where he expands on that and takes it to larger situations where armies are battling each other or states are battling each other. Quite a lot of the philosophical stuff that he writes, it can easily be extrapolated into larger scenarios. Because as I said, most of it is technical details regarding swordsmanship, in which case then you're just fighting, in a sword fight against either one opponent or many opponents. He also has quite a few passages regarding how you fight multiple combatants, or it's a multiple combatant versus multiple combatant. He writes a lot about that, and he also still extrapolates and expands on all smaller details that are technical. If it happens in a one-on-one fight, here's are the things that are still relevant if you scale it up into an army engaging an army, or if it's a state engaging a state. There are certain principles which are fundamental and still apply no matter what size of engagement it is that you're in. He writes about that. He specifically does write about these things when I'm telling you, like, these things aren't my interpretations of what he is writing. These are things which he does right here. It's like, this is a principle that applies whether or not it's in an individual combat or if it's an army fighting an army. So you can find a lot of that in this book here. It's not a very long book. It is quite short. Which, if we compare it to Art of War, also very short. If you compare it to something like On War, like I said, for modern Western academics, they like the technical stuff. They like numbers as well. The quantitative side of research is, in my opinion, my observation, the part which is currently dominating all research and conversations. But you can see that it's not really a new phenomenon. On War is a very, very technical book, and there's a lot of details that Clausewitz goes into regarding operations as well in his book. But you won't find that with either of these books, The Art of War or The Book of Five Rings. Book of Five Rings, of course, for like I said, the relation, the parts about swordsmanship itself. That is true. But even then, it's still only like, I'd say, a third, maybe even a quarter of the book, and it's this short. Everything else is more on fundamental principles and like larger, bigger ideas regarding philosophy, strategy, society. So would I recommend this book? I mean, I of course, really liked the book and found it very insightful. But I wouldn't recommend it as like a first book to somebody who is trying to get into studying Oriental military philosophy, strategy, or history. Art of War is much, much easier to read. This is probably a much, much better way to get into it. With the Art of War, you actually do find a lot of similarities because this is Chinese text and this is Japanese. There are a lot of similarities that you can find regarding philosophy between these two books that you can cross correlate and see. And then these two books, if you've read them and you then analyze Western text, you can then see that there is fine distinctions between the way that they approach war. It is a very, very real distinction that I so far have found has not been taken seriously by pretty much anybody. The only people that I have found that have written about these things so far in my research is Western military commanders that have fought against an Oriental enemy. Who have I read? Alexander the Great. He himself didn't write anything, but the writings around the ancient Greeks and how they fought against the Persians and other counterparts in the Middle East. Well, the Middle East. That's not the right geographical term. That's not what they call it in the past. I'm forgetting what the right words are. But yeah, the ancient Greeks, they have a lot of writing. But the problem with the ancient Greek text is that some of it is clearly racist. But just because they thought about themselves as superior in certain senses doesn't mean that it immediately undermines and how do I say this? Just because they were racist doesn't mean that things that they wrote about should be completely discredited as being completely untrue. There's always some truth in lies here, there, and everywhere. But you can find in the ancient Greeks, when they write about their dealings in terms of military affairs against Orientals, you can find quite a few excerpts and passages regarding how they thought themselves as different and how they perceived the Orientals as fighting in different forms. And we're not just talking about tactics and operations here. We're talking about societal, cultural differences, how that affected strategy operations. The other commanders that I've read, and there's not a lot about it written, it's usually just a couple of excerpts here and there. I know Westmoreland, Curtis LeMay, MacArthur, and actually I think those are the main three that I've come across. They have written about differences between Western and Oriental philosophies in warfare. And by written, I don't mean that they always wrote down in a book or something. I know in LeMay's autobiography, Mission with LeMay, there are a couple of passages which he writes about how when he was conducting the air campaigns against Japan, and then after the war, when he visited Japan, he writes a little bit regarding his own thoughts on the differences in clashes in culture. Westmoreland, he wrote it. No, I don't think he wrote. I think that was the interview he gave, and there's certain excerpts you can find here and there from that interview. I've never actually watched the interview or read where it was published regarding his campaigns when they were in Vietnam. He mentioned some. He mentioned regarding the clashes of the different civilizations here, East versus West. And for MacArthur, because he spent a lot of time in Asia, and his father actually was very, very well read and versed in Far Eastern cultures. MacArthur and his dad, they have, I'm pretty sure, if I recall, had a very good understanding of the differences between the East and the West and how that related to warfare. As I said, it's not a subject that has been taken seriously by anybody, at least so far that I found out. I'm still looking. I haven't properly done as much research into this topic as I have my fighter combat tactics research, because I've already establish a thesis and have several hypotheses that I'm doing research to try and prove or disprove. But for this topic here, I have not gone fully in depth. But from what I've seen so far, this is what I found. If I do find something that contradicts or proves or more new information regarding this topic, I'll be sure to bring that up again. But yeah, that's all I kind of wanted to talk about regarding this book. I'm probably gonna try and reread it again, and then I'll take proper notes this time. And yeah, I might make a second follow-up video to this.